3 months after their first meeting, Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the morning sun paint the city in golden hues. For the first time in 8 years, he was experiencing the world without the filter of constant pain. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer, and his mind operated with a precision he had almost forgotten was possible. Jamie was due to arrive for their final treatment session and evaluation. The formal protocol was complete, and by any measure, the experiment had been a stunning success. Marcus hadn't experienced a headache in 6 weeks. His energy levels had returned to normal, and his cognitive function had improved dramatically. Blood tests confirmed what they both already knew. The toxic compounds had been eliminated from his system, but as Marcus prepared for their meeting, he found himself thinking less about his own recovery and more about what came next. Over the past 3 months, he had watched Jamie work with a dedication and intelligence that reminded him of his own younger self. The boy possessed something rare in Marcus's world, genuine brilliance. Combined with authentic integrity, when the elevator opened, Jamie emerged looking more confident than he had 12 weeks earlier. He carried his usual equipment bag, but there was something different in his posture, a quiet satisfaction that spoke of a job well done. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," Jamie said, setting up his materials for the final evaluation. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I felt in 8 years," Marcus replied honestly. "But I think you already know that." They went through the standard assessment routine one final time. Pain levels, 0. Cognitive function, excellent. Energy levels, optimal. Sleep quality, restored. Every metric confirmed what both men already understood. The treatment had been completely successful. "Well," Jamie said, packing up his equipment, "I think we can officially declare this experiment a success. Your brain has fully detoxified, and all inflammatory markers have returned to normal ranges. You should be able to resume a completely normal life." Marcus nodded, then walked to his desk and opened the drawer where he had kept the $1 million check for 3 months. He pulled it out and looked at it for a moment, remembering the day he had written it with such skepticism. "You told me to get the check ready," Marcus said, holding up the paper. "It's been ready since day one." Jamie stared at the check, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, the teenager seemed overwhelmed. His hands shook slightly as he accepted the payment that represented more money than his family had ever imagined possible. "I can't believe this is real," Jamie whispered, looking at the numbers and his name written in Marcus's precise handwriting. "Believe it," Marcus said firmly. "You accomplished something that dozens of specialists couldn't achieve. You gave me back my life. That's worth far more than $1 million. Jamie carefully folded the check and put it in his backpack. But Marcus could see that the boy was struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. For someone from Jamie's background, this amount of money represented not just personal security, but the ability to transform his entire family's future. "This will change everything for us," Jamie said quietly. "My parents can stop worrying about money. I can go to college without debt. My little sister can pursue her dreams without financial constraints." He paused, looking up at Marcus with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." Marcus sat down across from Jamie, recognizing that this was a pivotal moment. The transaction could end here, debt paid, promise fulfilled. But looking at this remarkable young man, Marcus saw possibilities that extended far beyond their original agreement. "Jamie, I need to ask you something important. What are your plans now?" "With this money, you could do almost anything." "I want to study biochemistry at Stanford," Jamie said immediately. "Dr. Vasquez has connections there, and she thinks I could get into their graduate program early. After that, I'd like to research neurotoxicology and maybe develop treatments for other conditions." "That's a fine plan," Marcus said. "But it could take 10 or 15 years before you're in a position to make a real impact. What if there was another way? What if you could start making a difference immediately?" Jamie looked curious but puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand." Marcus leaned forward, his business instincts engaging with a problem that excited him more than any deal he had ever structured. You've discovered something extraordinary, but one successful treatment doesn't constitute a medical revolution. To truly help people, you need clinical trials, regulatory approval, treatment centers, trained medical staff, and global distribution. That requires resources on a scale that most researchers never access. Those kinds of resources would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, Jamie said. Even with this money, I couldn't fund something like that. But I could, Marcus said simply. The words hung in the air between them. And Jamie's eyes widened as he began to understand what Marcus was proposing. You've given me back my life, Marcus continued. But more importantly, you've shown me something I haven't seen in decades, pure innovation motivated by the desire to solve real problems. In my world, most people are driven by profit, power, or prestige. You're driven by something much rarer. Marcus stood and walked to his whiteboard, where he often sketched out business strategies. He picked up a marker and began drawing organizational charts and flow diagrams. What if we created the Wellington Institute for Neurotoxicology Research? You would be the chief research officer, working with the best scientists money can hire. We'd fund comprehensive clinical trials to validate your treatment protocol. Then establish treatment centers in major cities worldwide. Jamie watched in amazement as Marcus outlined a vision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. The goal wouldn't be profit, Marcus continued. It would be to identify and treat toxin-induced neurological conditions that conventional medicine has missed. Your aspartame discovery is probably just the beginning. There could be dozens of other compounds causing similar problems. But why would you invest that much money in something so uncertain? Jamie asked. Marcus set down the marker and turned to face the young man who had changed his life. Because uncertainty is where the biggest opportunities hide. Because most people are too afraid of failure to attempt something truly revolutionary. And because I've learned that the most valuable discoveries often come from the most unexpected sources. Marcus returned to his desk and pulled out a legal pad. I'm proposing a partnership, Jamie, not just funding for your education, but the resources to build something that could change medicine forever. You'd have access to equipment and expertise that most researchers can only dream about. What would you want in return? Your commitment to the mission, Marcus said without hesitation. I don't need more money and I don't need recognition. But I want to be part of something that matters, something that makes a real difference in people's lives. Jamie was quiet for a long time, staring at the organizational chart Marcus had drawn. You're talking about revolutionizing how we think about chronic diseases. I'm talking about taking your discovery and scaling it to help millions of people worldwide. Your original treatment costs about $200 in supplements and saves patients thousands in unnecessary medical expenses. Imagine if we could identify and treat 10 other conditions with similar effectiveness. Marcus could see the possibilities forming in Jamie's mind. The boy who had started this journey trying to help his mother was beginning to envision solutions for countless other families facing similar struggles. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling out another document. I've been thinking about this for weeks. And I want you to have this regardless of whether you accept my partnership proposal. He handed Jamie a second check. This one considerably larger than the first. $5 million? Jamie's voice cracked as he read the amount. Call it a signing bonus, Marcus said with a slight smile. Whether you work with me or pursue your own path, you've earned the right to focus on research without financial constraints. Use it for your education, your family security, or seed funding for your own research institute. It's yours with no strings attached. Jamie stared at the checks, his mind clearly struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. In the space of a single morning, he had gone from being a brilliant but unknown teenager to having the resources to pursue any future he could imagine. I need time to think about this, Jamie said finally. The partnership proposal, I mean. The scope of what you're suggesting is incredible, but it's also overwhelming. Take all the time you need, Marcus said. But remember that while you're deciding, there are people out there suffering from conditions that we might be able to treat. Time is a luxury they don't have. Marcus walked Jamie to the elevator, reflecting on how much had changed since their first meeting. 3 months ago, he had been a desperate man clinging to false hope. Today, he felt more energized and purposeful than he had in decades. "Jamie," Marcus said as the elevator doors opened, "regardless of what you decide about the Institute, I want you to know something. You didn't just cure my headaches. You reminded me what it feels like to believe in something larger than yourself." Jamie smiled, but Marcus could see the weight of responsibility. The blood test results arrived on a Friday afternoon, 3 days after Jamie had drawn the sample in Marcus's private medical suite. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the biochemistry professor Jamie had mentioned, called personally to deliver the news. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice carrying both excitement and scientific caution, "the genetic analysis confirms Jamie's hypothesis. You do indeed carry the rare variant that affects aspartame metabolism. Your body processes the compound differently than 99% of the population." Marcus was sitting at his desk when Sarah patched the call through, and he found himself gripping the phone tighter than necessary. After so many dead ends, he had almost convinced himself that this would be another disappointment. "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus asked. "It means that every time you consume aspartame, your body creates methylformid compounds instead of harmless byproducts. These compounds cross the blood-brain barrier and accumulate in neural tissue, triggering severe inflammatory responses. The process is slow, which is why your symptoms didn't appear immediately, but over 8 years of regular consumption, you've built up significant toxic levels." Marcus thought about his daily routine. 4 cups of coffee with artificial sweetener, diet sodas during long meetings, sugar-free gum to maintain focus. For nearly a decade, he had been systematically poisoning himself while trying to maintain his health. "And Jamie believes he can reverse this?" "The science supports his approach," Dr. Vasquez replied carefully. "We've run computer models based on your specific genetic profile and estimated toxin load. The detoxification protocol should be effective, but it will require patience and strict adherence to the regimen." That evening, Jamie arrived at Marcus's penthouse with 2 large cases of supplies. Marcus watched as the teenager methodically organized dozens of bottles, each labeled with scientific names that meant nothing to him. There were amino acid complexes, specialized vitamins, mineral chelators, and compounds Marcus had never heard of. "This looks like a chemistry experiment," Marcus observed. "In a way." "It is," Jamie replied, arranging the bottles in a specific order. "Your brain chemistry has been altered by toxic accumulation. We need to provide the right molecular tools to help your system eliminate these compounds safely." Jamie pulled out a detailed chart showing the treatment timeline. "The first 2 weeks will be the hardest. As we start mobilizing stored toxins, you might experience temporary worsening of symptoms. That's actually a good sign. It means the detoxification process is working." Marcus felt his skepticism returning. "So you're telling me I'll feel worse before I feel better? That's convenient." "I understand your doubt," Jamie said calmly. "My mom said the exact same thing. But think about it logically. If toxins have been accumulating for years, they can't all be eliminated overnight. The body needs time to safely process and remove them." Over the next several days, Marcus followed Jamie's protocol religiously. Each morning, he took a specific combination of supplements with his breakfast. No more artificial sweeteners. And no diet sodas, no sugar-free gum. Jamie had provided a detailed list of hidden sources of aspartame, and Marcus was shocked to discover how many products contained the compound. The first week was indeed difficult. Marcus's headaches seemed to intensify, and he experienced new symptoms: fatigue, irritability, and a strange metallic taste in his mouth. More than once, he was tempted to abandon the treatment and return to his familiar pain medications. "This is normal," Jamie assured him during one of their daily check-ins. "Your brain is releasing stored toxins faster than it can eliminate them. We need to support the process." Jamie adjusted the supplement regimen, adding compounds that would enhance liver function and support the brain's natural detoxification pathways. He also insisted that Marcus drink specific amounts of water at precise intervals to help flush the mobilized toxins from his system. "How do you know all this?" Marcus asked during one particularly difficult morning. "I've consulted with neurologists who've spent decades studying headaches, and none of them understood what you figured out in a few minutes." Jamie was quiet for a moment, measuring out the morning supplements with scientific precision. Sometimes being an outsider is an advantage. Doctors are trained to think within established frameworks. They look for known conditions and proven treatments. I didn't have those limitations. But the biochemistry knowledge, the understanding of genetic variations, that's graduate level science. "I've been studying this for 3 years, Jamie said simply. When someone you love is suffering and conventional medicine can't help, you become very motivated to find alternatives. I've probably read more papers on headache biochemistry than most specialists." Marcus found himself curious about this unusual teenager. "Tell me about your mother. What was her experience like?" Jamie's expression grew thoughtful. The pain was destroying her life. She couldn't work, could barely function. Some days she'd stay in bed with the curtains drawn, crying from the intensity. My dad didn't know how to help, and I felt completely powerless watching her suffer. That must have been difficult for a family. We almost fell apart. Dad started working extra shifts to pay for specialist visits, but the medical bills were crushing us. Mom felt guilty about the expense, which made everything worse. I was angry all the time, angry at doctors who couldn't help, angry at a system that had failed us, angry at feeling so helpless. Marcus recognized something in Jamie's voice that resonated with his own experience. Despite their vastly different circumstances, they had both been trapped by the limitations of conventional medicine. "When did you first suspect the aspartame connection?" "About 18 months into Mom's illness. I was reading research papers late one night when I found a case study about a woman with similar symptoms. The paper mentioned that her headaches resolved completely when she eliminated artificial sweeteners, but the authors dismissed it as coincidental. That made me start looking for other cases." "And you found a pattern?" "Eventually. It took months of research, but I identified 17 documented cases where severe headaches resolved after eliminating aspartame. The problem was that nobody had connected the dots about the genetic component. Without understanding the underlying mechanism, it just looked like random anecdotal evidence." By the second week, Marcus began to notice subtle changes. The edge seemed to be coming off his pain, not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. He found himself able to concentrate on work for longer periods, and the crushing fatigue that had accompanied his headaches was beginning to lift. "I think it might be working," he told Jamie during their morning session. "The pain isn't gone, but it feels different somehow. Less intense." Jamie nodded, making notes in his detailed treatment log. "That's consistent with what we expect. The acute inflammatory response is subsiding as toxin levels drop. The next phase should bring more significant improvement." Marcus was amazed by the boy's systematic approach. Jamie tracked every symptom, monitored the effectiveness of each supplement, and adjusted the protocol based on Marcus's daily reports. It was more thorough than any medical treatment Marcus had received from his expensive specialists. "You realize you could make a fortune with this knowledge?" Marcus observed. "There are millions of people suffering from chronic headaches who would pay anything for effective treatment." "Money wasn't the goal," Jamie replied. "I just wanted to help my mom, and now I want to help you. If this works, maybe we can publish the research and help other people too." Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by the teenager's integrity. In his business experience, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. Jamie seemed motivated purely by the desire to solve a problem that had caused real suffering. The third week brought a breakthrough. Marcus woke up on Wednesday morning and realized that his head didn't hurt. Not just less painful than usual, completely pain-free. It had been so long since he'd experienced such clarity that he almost didn't trust the sensation. He went through his entire morning routine waiting for the familiar stabbing to return, but it never came. For the first time in 8 years, he attended a full day of meetings without reaching for pain medication or asking Sarah to dim the lights. "This is incredible," Marcus told Jamie that evening. "I haven't had a completely pain-free day since this nightmare started." Jamie was clearly pleased but remained cautiously optimistic. "This is great progress, but we need to maintain the protocol for the full treatment period. The toxins are being eliminated, but we want to make sure we get them all and give your brain time to heal completely." Marcus agreed, though privately he was already convinced that Jamie had succeeded where everyone else had failed. The relief he felt was beyond anything money could buy, and for the first time in years, he was beginning to remember what life felt like without constant pain. As the days passed, Marcus found himself looking forward to his conversations with Jamie. The boy had an interesting perspective on life, informed by experiences that were very different from Marcus's privileged background. Jamie talked about the stress of watching his family struggle financially, about working part-time jobs to help pay bills, about the satisfaction of solving complex problems through pure determination. "What do you plan to do after this?" Marcus asked one morning. "College?" Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy, yet he sat in his penthouse office staring at the city below with hollow eyes. At 52, he controlled a tech empire worth $12 billion, owned properties on every continent, and could buy anything his heart desired. But there was one thing his fortune couldn't purchase: relief from the constant, crushing pain that had consumed his life for the past 8 years. The headaches started small, barely noticeable during board meetings and conference calls. Marcus ignored them, attributing the discomfort to stress and long hours. He was building an empire, after all. Pain was just the price of success. But as months turned to years, the headaches evolved into something monstrous. They came without warning, striking like lightning behind his eyes, sending waves of agony through his skull that left him gasping and disoriented. Every morning, Marcus swallowed a cocktail of medications prescribed by the world's most expensive doctors. Pain relievers, anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxants, and experimental drugs that cost more per pill than most people earned in a week. He had consulted neurologists in Switzerland, pain specialists in Japan, and alternative healers in remote corners of Tibet. He had undergone every scan, test, and procedure modern medicine could offer. The diagnosis was always the same: chronic cluster headaches of unknown origin. Resistant to conventional treatment, the pain had changed him. Once known for his sharp wit and commanding presence in boardrooms, Marcus had become irritable and isolated. He snapped at employees, canceled important meetings when the pain struck, and gradually withdrew from the public eye. His assistant Sarah had learned to recognize the warning signs. When Marcus pressed his palms against his temples and his jaw tightened, she knew to clear his schedule and dim the lights. On this particular Wednesday morning, Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports when the familiar stabbing sensation began behind his left eye. He set down the papers and reached for his medication, but the bottle was empty. Frustrated, he pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, I need you to call Dr. Patel and have him send over more of the blue pills. Also, reschedule the 2 o'clock meeting. I can feel another episode coming." "Of course, Mr. Wellington. There's also a young man here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's about your headaches." Security was about to escort him out, but he seemed so certain that you'd want to hear what he has to say. Marcus massaged his temples, feeling the pain intensify. "I don't have time for another quack-selling miracle cures. Tell security to handle it." "Sir, he's just a teenager. Maybe 16 or 17. He said to tell you that he knows why the medications aren't working and that he can help where others have failed." Despite his skepticism, something in Sarah's tone made Marcus pause. Over the years, he had encountered countless people claiming to have the cure for his condition. Doctors with experimental treatments, spiritual healers with ancient remedies, and charlatans selling expensive placebos. All had failed. Yet this was the first time someone so young had approached him with such confidence. "Send him up," Marcus said finally. "But give me 5 minutes first." Marcus used the time to take what remained of his morning medication and prepare himself for another disappointment. He had learned not to get his hopes up. Hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus was surprised by what he saw. The boy couldn't have been more than 17, with messy brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. His sneakers were worn, and his backpack looked like something a high school student would carry to chemistry class. He certainly didn't look like someone who possessed medical knowledge that had eluded the world's top specialists. "Mr. Wellington?" the boy asked, approaching the massive desk with more confidence than his appearance suggested. "I'm Jamie Chun. Thank you for seeing me." Marcus studied the young man carefully. Jamie's eyes were bright and intelligent, and despite his casual appearance, he carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "I'll give you 5 minutes," Marcus said curtly. "I've heard every cure imaginable, spent millions chasing false promises. What makes you think you can succeed where Harvard-trained neurologists have failed?" Jamie set his backpack on the floor and pulled out a tablet. "Because they've been treating the symptoms, not the cause." "May I ask you something personal?" Marcus gestured for him to continue, though his patience was already wearing thin. "When did you first start using artificial sweeteners in your coffee? Specifically aspartame-based ones?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Of all the things he had expected this teenager to ask, his choice of sweetener wasn't one of them. "About 9 years ago. My doctor recommended cutting sugar to improve my energy levels." "What does that have to do with anything?" Jamie's eyes lit up. "Everything. You see, some people have a genetic variation that affects how they metabolize aspartame. Instead of breaking down normally, it creates toxic byproducts that accumulate in brain tissue over time. These compounds trigger severe inflammatory responses in susceptible individuals, leading to the exact type of headaches you experience." Marcus felt a flicker of interest despite himself. "That's specific, but surely someone would have discovered this connection by now if it were real." "The genetic variation only affects about 1 in 50,000 people," Jamie explained, pulling up charts on his tablet. "It's so rare that most doctors never encounter it. The symptoms don't appear immediately either. It takes years of exposure for the toxins to build up to problematic levels. By then, patients have usually tried dozens of other explanations for their pain. And you discovered this how, exactly?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. "My mom had similar symptoms. We spent 3 years and our entire savings visiting specialists who couldn't help her. The pain was destroying our family. I started researching everything I could find about headaches, reading medical journals, studying biochemistry. I noticed patterns in case studies that seemed connected to artificial sweetener use, but no one had put the pieces together." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing what he had heard. The explanation was plausible, and it would certainly explain why traditional treatments had failed. But he had been disappointed too many times to let hope creep in easily. "Even if you're right about the cause," Marcus said slowly, "how would you cure something like that? If these toxins have been building up for years, surely they can't just be eliminated." Jamie smiled for the first time since entering the office. "Actually, they can. The human brain has remarkable detoxification abilities when given the right support. There's a specific protocol involving targeted nutrition, carefully timed supplementation, and a process called molecular chelation. It takes time, but the toxins can be safely removed." "How much time?" 6 to 8 weeks for significant improvement. 3 to 4 months for complete recovery." Marcus had heard confident predictions before, but something about Jamie's quiet certainty was different. The boy wasn't making grandiose promises or asking for money up front. He was simply presenting information as if it were scientific fact. "Assuming you're correct," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "what exactly are you proposing? Another expensive treatment program? Because I should warn you, I've already spent more on false cures than most people see in a lifetime." Jamie shook his head. "I'm not asking for money, Mr. Wellington. I'm offering to prove my theory. Give me 3 months to implement the treatment protocol. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you've lost nothing but time." Marcus almost smiled at the boy's naivety. "Time is money, son. And my time is particularly expensive. Why would you do this for free?" Because I know what it's like to watch someone suffer from this condition. My mom went through hell before I figured out what was wrong. If I can prevent that kind of suffering for someone else, that's worth more than any payment. The sincerity in Jamie's voice was unmistakable, but Marcus had grown cynical over the years. In his experience, everyone wanted something eventually. Still, the boy's explanation had been more scientifically sound than anything he had heard from supposed experts. "Tell me about your mother," Marcus said. "Did your theory actually work for her?" Jamie's expression grew serious. "She's been headache-free for 18 months now. It took 4 months of treatment, but the pain disappeared completely. She's back to her old self, working again, laughing again. The whole family got their lives back." Marcus studied the young man's face, looking for signs of deception. He had become expert at spotting lies and exaggerations, but Jamie's story rang true. There was something in his eyes, a quiet conviction that spoke of genuine experience rather than rehearsed promises. "Let's say I'm interested," Marcus said carefully. "Hypothetically, what would this treatment involve? I'm not drinking strange herbal concoctions or meditating with crystals." Jamie laughed, a sound that seemed surprisingly mature coming from someone so young. "Nothing like that? It's all science-based. First, we'd confirm the genetic marker with a simple blood test. Then we'd start with dietary modifications to stop further toxin accumulation. The active treatment involves specific amino acids, targeted vitamins, and compounds that support the brain's natural detoxification pathways. And you have access to these compounds?" "I've been work,"